like the project in the class that we're taking has talked a lot about like identities and labels, and I guess just like what do you think is like significant about them, like why we need them, or like how they can be like bad at times. I guess that's not great phrasing, but like the plus and minuses of
advantages and disadvantages of identity labeling.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, you know, there's this sort of sense of pride that people can establish in identifying themselves with a group and being able to have a community to interact with of like-minded peoples. But of course the labels can also be misused against you and describing you in a negative way. So it sort of depends on the positioning of the speaker in terms of how that label is being used and whether it acquires negative or positive attributes. How's that? Pretty vague, I know. But
yeah, that's true. Maybe getting to more specific, like gender identity or something, because Regina mentioned you guys talk about like intersexuality in your class. If you want to like talk a little bit about that, or
how would you phrase the question?
I guess like the relationship to intersectionality. So yeah.
Of gender, of labels.
Yeah, like gender labeling, I guess.
Gender labeling.
Just like, or the gender binary.
The gender. I'm trying to think about how you guys are coming at this question. Okay. No, I don't know how to answer. I'm sorry. Can you rephrase?
Sure. Let's see. Like, I guess so when you're talking about like the advantages and disadvantages of labels, like having like being able to call somebody like a boy or a girl, like has its advantages for like identifying them a certain way, but then how that can be like then the disadvantages of that, I guess, or like if you don't exactly like identify personally like in one or the other, or
okay. Well, so we have a society that is fixated on a two-gender system. The world around us, whether we like it or not, tends to enforce two set of gender labels on us, even if we are resisting that with other labels of our own, even if we are not interested in that gender binary set of labels. So we have this pressing labeling conflict that results from that sort of thing, where in the world you are being continually labeled boy or girl, you are being gendered by others. It becomes assigned. So if you don't identify with that, if you're not fitting into that, you're going to have this sort of constant sense of misfitting with the expectations of the people around you as they attempt to force you into one box or another and expect you to behave in certain ways, and perhaps you don't identify with those ways of behavior at all. So rather than having people treat you as if your approach is normal or typical, you are maybe frequently treated as if your reaction is strange, frequently treated as if you are doing something that should be stigmatized because it is outside of their expectations. So in that sense, the constant labeling of the world around us, forcing us into behavioral molds as well as just identity molds, is a real drawback for people who don't tend to fit into those labels, who are not comfortable with those labels. As a more specific answer, is that better?
Yeah. Then kind of thinking about like who imposes those labels, like as a society as a whole, is how do you break something like that, or like, I don't know, I guess try to like deconstruct that sort of system.
Sure. The two-gender system has fairly deep roots in American culture. We've identified with that for many decades. Could make a case for many centuries. So breaking it down is not an easy task. We are faced with that from authority figures, from peers, from clergy, from teachers, from the whole set of available institutions around us tend to label us with one gender or another. As each system comes to grips with other gender identities, it's becoming easier place to place, but of course we are still facing that. So Facebook gives us more gender identity options now. That's a more visible way to break that down. But the degree to which that affects your day-to-day life out in the physical world trying to get a job is still relatively minimal. So we have a step, but still many, many more steps to take. Education is of course useful, teaching people that gender and sex are not the same thing, that gender and sexuality are not the same thing, that other cultures don't have the same ideas about gender or sexuality that we do, which is of course part of what we do in anthropology, is attempt to break down exactly those sets of expectations. If we can do that, if we can disseminate that information, then people become more comfortable with diverse gender labeling or with giving up gender labeling and just treating people as people. But there are a lot of steps to take still.
Mm-hmm. I don't remember if it was back freshman year in your class, if you brought up this example, but we like talked about it in our class too, about like parents who like raise their children like without like gender labels,
Mm-hmm.
and how, I don't know if that's something that you could speak to, or...
I can.
Okay.
I can. I have a son, biologically speaking,
Mm-hmm.
and he appears to be developing with a male gender. We have tried not to force a particular gender role on him, so it's all right if I speak about personal issues here, I assume?
Yeah.
Okay, good. We're comfortable with him embracing whatever sort of gender identity issues that he wanted to. So for him, he was comfortable playing with both boys and girls' toys, quote unquote, until he hit school age and started receiving peer feedback that that was not okay. So he'd never gotten that from us, but he was absolutely getting that from peers. And we were disappointed by that, of course, because we wanted him to make his own choices without people being negative to him. In that sense, he has to confront the same kinds of gender hostility that everyone in the adult world has to. It's being put into play from very young. Our society has been doing that for a long time. We have really firm gender roles that we impose on kids essentially from birth, arguably from before birth, since people have been shown to treat their unborn children differently already if they know the gender, or rather the sex of the unborn child.
Yeah, we can, I guess, move on to more like intersectionality stuff.
Sure.
What would you say like your most salient like identities are that you like would put on yourself, or that others might like assign to you?
Sure, I can talk about that. I have essentially the entire array of available privilege. I'm a tall, white, heterosexual or cisgendered, if you will, bearded man. All of the available labels that put me into positions of power are available to me. So I face very few of the systems of oppression that most people do. I'm lucky in that way. I'm not particularly wealthy, so I've experienced some class challenges in my life, coming from relative poverty during certain periods, lower middle class to working class income, both my parents and myself. But other than that, the kinds of myriad interlocking forms of challenges and oppressions and systematic inequalities that tend to affect others, I've been largely spared. I'm, in a sense, lucky to have gone into anthropology, to become aware of these things that I was not aware of as a younger person, because they are not overt. Many of them are tacit, unspoken biases that don't hit a white, heterosexual, cisgendered, middle-class guy. And until I was exposed to them in anthropology classes and with friends from other backgrounds, I was ignorant of them, and probably was tacitly supporting those same systems of inequality. So there's my intersectionality from the other side, if you will.
That's true. Has there ever been moments where, like, after like having your education and being more aware of these things, and you find yourself like clashing with other people like your own age or younger, or just
Constantly. Constantly. The more aware of them I become, the more outspoken about it I've become. So trying to speak for women's rights, or particularly black rights, since the Ferguson events, has led me into direct conflict with peers from the past who don't think I should be doing activism, who think it's not my place, who think that those systems of oppression are not real, who think that there is no such thing as gender inequality or racial inequality or sexual inequality, etc., and who think that they are not related to each other if they do exist, and I have been disagreeing with them.
So has that kind of like changed how you teach in any sense, or
Yeah.
like that's such a
It has. I was already thinking about this when I started teaching, but with time I've thought about it only more. Students I've had here have told me they have sometimes told me I'm the only professor they've ever had who is identified as a feminist, who has ever even mentioned that gender inequality exists. And many of them were freshmen at the time, so take that with a grain of salt. But I was surprised to hear that, and surprised that I would be the outspoken voice in that case. So in that sense I was glad to be, but I don't think that I should have to be the voice of everyone else. I was hoping to be supportive of everyone else,
Right.
and do not want to be a voice in the wilderness. And I don't think I am. I'm finding out other faculty are also saying this sort of thing. Your professor has been outspoken in this regard, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, which is good.
That's very true.
So it's certainly changed the way I teach, and it's changed the way I make my syllabus. Now I put things about sexual harassment and sexual inequality into the syllabus that were not there even 5 years ago. And I try to make a point to talk about occasionally my own activism, but usually I keep that out of the classroom unless it's directly relevant. But certainly issues of inequality I'm bringing up every semester now, whereas before it was only if it came up. How's that?
That's good. I don't know how much.
We have 15 minutes.
Oh, okay, wow.
Okay.
It's a lot of time. I
We
guess
don't have to talk the entire time.
That's true. I'm just trying to think, like, like with you coming in with this like anthro background and kind of, I don't know, I guess just like personally in classes, like when these issues are brought up, it's like in my anthro classes, like they are brought up and it's good,
Yes.
and like discussions of them like can be really valuable like to students, but sometimes it seems like it can get like caught up in like the sort of like sciencey side of it and not as, I don't know, maybe it's just because like in my theory class now, like that we talk a lot about this like
Sure.
stuff too, but then it is very much like within the theories and like what people thought, but how do you kind of like branch that to like bringing it to like a people front, like with like communication.
Right.
So, like,
Well, I mean, like you say, there's sort of the theoretical or science side of this where we're trying to demonstrate that inequality exists and show them, like, here's the math. Look at the
Yeah.
math. Observe the pay differences. Observe the rates of violence. Observe, here's the math. Or even deeper, looking at social theories and how they explain the emergence of class inequality and things. So we can talk about that on the one hand, but it's not very personal. So you need to establish that, especially with developing young academics at the college level. But I think particularly with freshmen, which I teach, you also have to make it personal in some way. You have to show them these are people, these are real people. There are people in the classroom with you that may be experiencing some of these aspects of inequality. They are happening out in the streets of St. Louis right now. So both perspectives need to be regularly brought out to bring students into engagement with those ideas, I think. So when you are in a city that is torn by a lot of activism, that is a good time to confront students with these issues. But I mean, they're so constant that you can bring them up all the time. You can say, these are people in your life that are being affected by this. I think that's a good way to do it. So both science and personal. How's that?
yeah, that's good. How, because since like freshmen coming into like, just thinking back to like my freshman year,
Right.
even like just a lot of this stuff, like I don't think people make the general, well, I don't know how true this generalization is about SLU, but that like the majority of the student body being like pretty predominantly like white, middle class, like
Yes.
fairly like privileged. How is that like received initially like in the classroom when it's kind of like, you're talking about for some of these kids it's like the first time they're hearing this stuff, especially from you, like
Yeah.
if you could speak a little bit to how they
Sure.
respond, or
Sure.
I don't know if you've noticed any like growth in students like over classroom period, or
Most students have been positive in their response. I have very rarely had a student have a very negative response. I know that I have students out there who are coming from a background where they're ignorant of these issues and in some cases hostile of confronting them. And I've occasionally seen a student out in the audience shut down, you know, frown, arms folded, not wanting to engage. But they never said anything to me. They've never taken it to the
Right.
point of protesting my perspective. Although I did get one very negative student review who said that I should stop bringing so much feminism into the classroom at the end of a semester one time. And that was one out of hundreds of reviews, so it's not exactly,
Right.
I can't engage with that, you know. All my other reviews or comments from students have been that they found it eye-opening, if they bring it up at all, that they have been learning a lot. In particular, I've focused on Native American issues for most of my teaching career because I study Native American peoples. So students seem to be more easily able to confront that in a way because it's not part of their daily lives. When I start talking about women's rights or black rights, it runs up against their own stereotypes and expectations more. When I'm speaking about Native rights, because very few of them have Native people in their social circle, it is enough of a remove for them to be more instantly accepting. It takes me more time to work with women's rights or black rights than it does with Native rights, which I found strange. That would be the strangest thing I've had teaching, that they'll instantly be like, oh, Native peoples, they have faced a lot of oppression. But if I start talking about
Yeah.
women or black
That's
people
interesting.
facing oppression, they're like, oh, what do you mean? Explain this to me. I'm like, really? Okay. Well, I will, but I'm surprised that that is not a given for you. How's that?
That's great, yeah. That was really interesting.
I thought so.
Is it just, do you think, because, like you said, just the distancing aspect, and it's not something that, like, is very, like, highly publicized, whereas, like, a lot of these other issues seem to be, like, very much in the news recently and very much, like, all over Facebook, and...
I do think it's both. I think we hear a narrative of indigenous peoples facing oppression from young. It's even finally made it into our history textbooks that, you know, kids in grade school are now learning that Native peoples faced a lot of challenges. It's not just this kind of, when I was in grade school, it was very basic, like Columbus shows up, then the Pilgrims show up, and now all the Indians are gone. It was this extremely simplistic narrative. So now we learn this more complex story, at least many high schools do, many even grade schools do, where indigenous peoples struggle and face challenges and are removed, and that's not an entirely good process, and I think that's better. When we start talking about other issues, other intersecting issues of inequality, I think there's a lot of political tension right now, a lot of misinformation coming from some people and confusing information coming from some people, so that you can get really different narratives out in the public discourse right now about who is facing repression, who is facing inequality. Is that inequality real? And if it is, how should we confront it? And since that is more contentious, I think people have more hostility towards accepting just facts about it in a way, because politics has made it complex. How's that?
That's great.
Okay.
I don't know. Do you have any more questions?
She's the questioner.
I can see that.
Yeah.
She's really good at coming up with them on her feet.
Good.
Yeah, well, it's just because it's like thinking about like the history thing too. Like they do, we did like learn about slavery like in middle
Yes.
school, and we did learn
Yeah.
about like the women's like suffrage movement and like all those things. But
Good.
I think it's because it's like when you learn about it in history, kind of at least in the books, you will like read the chapter, and when the chapter's over, it's almost like, oh, okay, so it's done
Right.
now, instead of like
Yes.
moving forward. Like
A lot of times they end with Martin Luther King. They say, look, we won.
yeah,
Civil rights is established. And you're like, well, yes, but there's more to do. There's more work to do. I think you're right. I think the narrative is structured that way. Women's suffrage, done. Civil rights, done. Is that what you were getting at?
Yeah, but it's just like, I don't know. And then how do you kind of keep, because people, you hear this like constantly in these conversations, well, we have a black president now, like we're like post like race, like all this stuff, and with,
Right.
especially we talked in class about like Rachel Dolezal and like issues like surrounding that, and people being like, well, why can't she? I mean, this is something we, like our class, our teacher brought up in our classes, like sort of, it wasn't like a division, we were just all didn't really know how to handle it because...
I admit I'm not certain how to handle that one.
Yeah.
So I've been ignoring it because I don't know what to do. I'm waiting until I understand it more before I really engage with that one.
Yeah.
With President Obama is a nice example of different intersecting kinds of identities. He has a lot of class privilege and male privilege, but he's still black. So yes, we have a black president now. But in other ways, he faced less difficulty. It's complicated.
Yeah. Like, would you say because of his like educational background, like going
Right.
to like Columbia and Harvard, and like how do you...
Right.
Yeah.
We still haven't had a woman president.
Yeah.
We still have had very few to no presidents of even middle class background, much less lower class background. A lot of different things going on there.
So do you think in like that situation of Obama, like, because I don't want to say like they like assign certain values to like different privileges, but
Sure.
like in society, like for what, I don't know, I guess just from what from your perspective, I don't think you can just like rank them, but just
No.
like...
No. We don't do competitive inequality.
Yeah.
Yeah. They all apply in different situations. All of them are affecting us all the time. Situationally, we may be harmed by one, benefited by another, sometimes at the same time. So constantly applying, constantly shifting.
Okay, well, I think that's great.
Okay.
Thank you for taking the time.